Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Thank you. I know you came for the debate, so we want to get started because we have to cut off at a certain time, and I don't want to take away from our guest. I am Tony Stewart, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second day in our 5-day series on the topic, the issue of censorship in America, is the First Amendment dead? Following today's debate, and I will give the format in a moment, I am happy to report to you at the panel over in the bar room following this immediately after the debate ends, both of our guests have graciously agreed to go to the panel and you can continue there with them as well as the other panel members. So I think you'll have a very intellectual and lively debate all afternoon. I also want to mention that we appreciate Local Color and the fact that they have developed this t-shirt for us, and some of you bought those yesterday and they will be here today, and they can also sell others if you're interested. We just concluded a television program that was very lively and energetic, and let us continue now. I welcome to our program today, first of all, to my immediate right, Mr. Jack Thompson, who is a Miami-based attorney, and he is considered a driving force behind the national campaign in what he describes as obscenity in rock music. Our guest to date has successfully banned 2 Live Crew's albums, As Nasty as They Want to Be, in 22 counties, 2 countries, and helped convict Florida record store owner Charles Friedman. Our guest has appeared on such programs as Good Morning America, Nightline, CBS Morning Show. Mr. Thompson was born in Cleveland and graduated from Denison University in Greenville, Ohio, with a history political science major. After graduation, he attended and received a law degree from Vanderbilt University. Let's welcome to our forum, and I will introduce the other guests then and then the format, but let's welcome Mr. Jack Thompson. It is also my pleasure to welcome to the debate Mr. John Morris, who has led the fight against the attack on artistic expression for over 25 years in relation to the First Amendment. He is the co-producer of Woodstock in 1969. He informed me last night that when he looked out over that audience of over 500,000, he had only 2 words, which he will tell you what they were. John Morris, if they're not censored. John Morris was the producer of a number of very famous rock groups in America, including Pink Floyd, David Bowie, The Grateful Dead, Paul McCartney, The Who, and Frank Zappa. He is also the United States representative to Anchor Records and the consultant to RC Records. He has also appeared on many national programs, including the Today Show, Good Morning America, and Larry King. Our 2 guests have graciously agreed to all the rules. Mr. Jack Thompson will go first, and he will give a 15-minute presentation on his position. Concluding that, Mr. Morris will also take 15 minutes to present his position. Then each will have a 5-minute rebuttal. At the conclusion of those 2 rebuttals, those who wish to ask questions, and I suspect 1 or 2 people might do so, please go to the mic in the center and we will identify yourself and let you ask the question. Each of our guests has also agreed to limit their answers to 3 minutes, and after the TV show, I might have to call them on that. Following that, each one is going to take a 1-minute summary, and Mr. Morris will go first. With those rules in place, ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you to the podium, Mr. Jack Thompson.
Thank you, Tony. I agreed to and wanted to be on college campuses to debate this issue because if you ever had the experience of talking to the media about what your position is, somehow it loses something in the translation. In fact, the only censors in this country are the media, who withhold from the American people the facts of this and many other situations so that the American people cannot, under the First Amendment, make their own decision about what's right and what is wrong. The fact is that Two Live Crew is a threat to the environment just as surely as burning bluegrass in this part of the country is a threat to the environment, and which I have read about on the front page of the Coeur d'Alene Press this morning. And I'm opposed to censorship. I need to point out, censorship is unconstitutional, it's un-American, it violates the First Amendment. What I'm in favor of is what the 49 states in this country are in favor of and have passed, as well as the federal government, and that is the constitutional enforcement of obscenity laws that, among other things, protect every woman in this room from rape. The problem with Two Live Crew is that their album describes, advocates, promotes, glorifies, and incites the rape of women and the mental molestation of children in describing to those children the idea that a woman is nothing but a piece of meat, to be treated as less than a human being. George Will, in the July 30, 1990 issue of Newsweek, which the cover of which is graced by now thankfully retired Justice William Brennan, who was the only justice in the Ohio child obscenity case who said that child pornography, that is, pornography depicting sex between adults and children, is protected under the First Amendment. And as I said, thankfully he's off the Supreme Court. In that same Newsweek issue, George Will discussed America's slide into the sewer. A confused society protects lungs more than minds, trout more than black women. George Will notes the similarity between the testimony in the Central Park jogger rape trial and the lyrics of the Two Live Crew album. First, the testimony. The prosecutor asked, quote, "After she was hit on the head with a pipe, did someone take her clothes off?" "Yeah." "Okay, who took her clothes off?" "All of us." "Did somebody have sex with her?" "Yeah." "Did a lot of people have sex with her?" "Yeah." Will writes, when arrested, the defendant said it was, quote, "something to do. It was fun." Where can you get the idea that sexual violence against women is fun? From a music store, through Walkman earphones, from boomboxes blaring forth the rap lyrics of Two Live Crew. And then he gives some of the lyrics, and Will points out that the conspiracy by the media in this country to keep from the American people the content of this album amounts to censorship. Because everybody's in favor of freedom, everybody's in favor of the First Amendment, as I am, until one hears the content of this album, and until one hears, which the ACLU doesn't want you to know, that obscenity has been illegal in this country since 1701, and that the Supreme Court has handed down 30 consecutive rulings in this country saying that obscenity is not protected by the First Amendment. The lyrics: "To have her walking funny, we try to abuse it. A big stinking pussy can't do it all, so we try real hard just to bust the walls." Will writes, that is, bust the walls of women's vaginas. Two Live Crew's lyrics exult in busting women, almost always called bitches, in various ways forcing anal sex, forcing women to lick feces off the anus of a man. Now that's entertainment, ladies and gentlemen. And we hear a lot about the slippery slope that supposedly I and others have put us on to obliterate the First Amendment. The First Amendment is alive and well in this country, and it will continue to be so because the Supreme Court is there, the ACLU is there, good and right-thinking people like you are there to say that we don't want our rights, which are guaranteed under the First Amendment and the rest of the Constitution, obliterated by some yahoos down in Florida or somebody on the Aryan Nation Network or whatever, obliterating our rights. And they will not be obliterated. But a society, ladies and gentlemen, that cannot draw a distinction between Chaucer or Catcher in the Rye and an album such as Two Live Crew's As Nasty as They Want to Be, and the promotion of rape therein, is a society that cannot make a distinction about anything, and is in serious, serious trouble. I want to address the issue of, first, I didn't do this, I need to do it. Let me define what obscenity is. Not my definition. This is a Supreme Court's ruling in Miller versus California that was handed down in 1971. It is the result of 400 years of English and American jurisprudence in evolving the standard that we now have today as to what is obscene. It's a three-pronged test under Miller. A, the item which is being sold must appeal to the prurient or the obsessive sexual interest of the consumer. B, it must be below the local community standard for that type of material. Not some national standard, the local community has a right to decide. And finally, and this is the most arduous prong of the three-pronged Miller test, for an item to be obscene, it must be without any, underlying any, serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific content. The problem with Two Live Crew's album was that there are 18 cuts on that album. Every single cut on that album talks about sex and nothing but. It glorifies in violent terms the brutalization of women and advocates that people do that to women. The issue of race has been raised by Luther Campbell, the head of Two Live Crew. And by the way, the main reason I went after him is because he's from my hometown, Miami, Florida, the land of Miami Vice and the land of Luther Campbell. And I believe in doing something about local problems. It's not my fault that the ACLU filed a lawsuit in Broward County a year ago asking a federal judge appointed by Jimmy Carter, not Ronald Reagan, to declare this album not obscene. And that federal judge, in a 62-page opinion after a full-blown trial at which Two Live Crew's expert Henry Gates from Duke testified, quote, Luther Campbell stands with Chaucer, Shakespeare, and Joyce as one of the brilliant poets of Western civilization, close quote, at $300 an hour, by the way. That federal judge nevertheless ruled this album is obscene because it's an appeal to the loins rather than an appeal to the intellect. It glorifies the rape of women, close quote. And yet the argument that this was a racist attack by white people that don't understand black culture has persisted, despite the fact that the first judge in Florida that found the album obscene, this was way back in February of last year, it seems like a light year away to me. It was found obscene in Fort Myers, Florida on the southwest coast, and the Fort Myers News Press reporter called Luther Campbell on the phone and said, Luther, your album has just been declared in Florida by Judge Anderson. And Luther Campbell said to the reporter, quote, the judge is a racist and he must be Klan, close quote. And the reporter said, but Luther, he didn't say that, he said, but Luther, the judge is black. Judge Isaac Anderson is a black man who understands, he says, black culture, and he also understands that raping black women is not a black cultural event. And I would add to that the words of Edward Arundel, who is the manager for Wynton Marsalis, one of the great jazz musicians in this country. Mr. Arundel happens to be black, and he points out the controversy surrounding Two Live Crew has absolutely nothing to do with the First Amendment. The real issue is the impropriety of marketing pornography to children. Unprincipled attorneys use the letter of the law in order to defeat the spirit of the law and to collect legal fees. These attorneys, record distributors, and retailers have formed a partnership with Two Live Crew to sell non-musical garbage to our children. The only racism is the more subtle work of those who hold this trash out as representative of our society's proud, principled, and hard-working black citizenry. One of the problems is that there are bad people in the world. We just fought a war, and whether you agree with it or disagree with whether or not we fought that war, and I'm, like maybe many of you, have different feelings at odds with one another as to what we did there and why we did it and so forth, we can probably all agree that Saddam Hussein is an evil man who was raping a nation, having women raped, having children killed, and so forth. And God help the people who were under his jackboot for many, many years. So thankfully, at least some of that, however, except for the Civil War that's now raging, was stopped. There are irresponsible people who live in this country, and one of the names of one of those people is Luther Campbell, who said before all of this hit the fan, quote, "This stuff is so harmful, I won't allow my own daughter, who's 8 years of age, to listen to it," close quote. And yet Luther Campbell would not do anything to keep it out of the hands of other people's children. He further said, quote, "My next album will be more obscene than my last one," close quote. And then he promised in January of last year that every album would be more obscene than the prior album. And in fact, at the Long Years record store on the NBC affiliate's camera, where I had a discussion with the record store owner there this morning right here in Coeur d'Alene, who was selling Two Live Crew's new album, live in concert, which indeed is more obscene than as nasty as they want to be. So we continue the slide into the sewer. But the problem is women as well as children. Women are second-class citizens in this country, and I say that as a conservative Republican who happens to know, based upon my representation of sexually abused women, that if you're a woman and raped in this country, you're raped twice. You're raped by the perpetrator, and then you're raped by the system that tries to say that it was your fault that you were raped. It was because of the dress that you had on. It was because you were in a part of town that you shouldn't have been in. It was because you asked for it. In fact, there was a judge in Florida this past summer who took the confession of a man who raped a woman and said, "I'm going to let you go. I'm not going to sentence you, sir, because," quote, "the woman is so pathetic, she deserved it," close quote. And the ACLU and the liberals were all in a snit about this judge. How could a judge say such a thing? Because the men that they defended, Two Live Crew, said the same thing and sold it to 1.3 million children and prepared a whole generation for the idea that every woman in this room doesn't deserve to be treated on an equal basis with a man. That sex is something you can do to somebody, not something that you offer them in love, either inside or outside of marriage, as a matter of fact. But surely we can agree that a man has no right to rape a woman, and that a society that does not take seriously the distribution of pro-rape material that happens to be obscene, that is constitutionally prosecuted, is not a society that takes seriously the question of rape. We can't have it both ways. We can't be concerned about the rape rate that is rising at 4 times the rate of any other violent crime category in this country, and at the same time pretend that ideas don't have consequences, that advocating the rape of women and describing how to do it and selling it to children and adults is not wrong. How am I doing time? 1 minute. I'd like to conclude with some of the words of Andrea Dworkin, who is a leftist, who is a socialist, who is a women's rights advocate. She happens to be a lesbian. God bless her, because she testified to the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography in part in the following ways. "I'm a citizen of the United States, and in this country where I live, every year millions of pictures are being made of women with our legs spread. In the country where I live as a citizen, there is a pornography of the humiliation of women, where every single way of humiliating a human being is taken to be a form of sexual pleasure. Certainly it is freedom for those who do it. Certainly it is freedom for those who use it as entertainment. But when your rape is entertainment, your worthlessness is absolute, and one lives inside a nightmare of sexual abuse that is both actual and potential." And I conclude by noting, as she did, to the Commission, I am asking you to help the exploited, not the exploiters, and to do something for their freedom under the Constitution. Thank you.
Morris.
Jack doesn't get the joke, which is what Two Live Crew is. Two Live Crew is a marketing, merchandising, pushing the envelope as far as they possibly can, attempt on behalf of a group of black men in Miami, using a vernacular of the area, which is what rap is, to make some money. I don't think Luther Campbell is advocating rape, and I don't think that the album is worth buying. I went out, I used to kid Jack that every time I started doing these debates with him, I had to go out and buy $27.50 worth of the worst crap in the world, and I tried to charge him for it. He wouldn't pay me, because he had to buy the same thing, and we both agree on it. Luther Campbell and Two Live Crew have about as much social validity and will go away just as quickly as New Kids on the Block. But there is an attempt by certain groups of people in this country to tell us, to tell you, and to tell me what you can see, what you can read, what you can listen to have us conform to their attitude and their idea and their morals. Now they bring into it anything having to do with sex is automatically bad. Well, we're stuck with a Victorian image that this works with. But this works with these groups of people into trying to destroy our freedom to read, to see a movie, Henry and June, not particularly a very good movie, to listen to Two Live Crew, to go into a store and buy it. Now, Jack said that this morning he went to the local record store and he had a chat with the guy in the record store who had the record available for one of you to make the choice to buy or not to buy. And he talked the record store owner on NBC television into taking the album out of the store. So now if you go to the record store, you don't have the choice. My feeling is I would like to have the choice. Now, I'm not going to run down and call up CBS and get them to put the album back in, because I don't think the album is that valid in and of itself. But my major argument with Jack and with Jack's position is that don't take my choice away from me. Yes, the ACLU has had to defend people in situations that any of us would find very uncomfortable with. You've had situations in this area with the ACLU and with other activist groups having to work to protect people because of their color, because of their attitudes, because of where they were born. If you take a law as broad as the First Amendment, if you say that Congress will make no law to abridge the freedom of speech, if you take one piece of it and you chop it away, the whole damn thing goes down the drain. So I'm not going to stand here and, as Jack would have me say, oh, it's great to promote rape among women, or to denigrate women. I don't say that for a minute. We had a lecture back in, I was in Utah, where I thought I was going to get killed. But we had a lecture back in Utah where Jack was talking about pornography leading to rape. Well, Charlie Manson, on the same kind of basis, is quoted as saying that he planned the Sharon Tate murders based on the Book of Revelations. I think those two things are just about as valid. We had a woman stand up in the audience, not a woman, a girl, 19 years old. I've insulted any 19-year-olds, I hereby apologize. But stood up and said, I was raped a few weeks ago. And pornography was not the contributing factor in my being raped. A sick mind was the contributing factor to my being raped. It's not some guy reading a book. It's the same as it's not some 8-year-old child who Jack refers to going and buying an album in a record store and then going to a playground and teaching all the rest of the kids the lyrics to Two Live Crew. I don't think these kids are destroyed for the rest of their lives. I also would just as soon it does not happen. But I would ask very, very quickly, where the hell is an 8-year-old kid walking down the street with the 15 or 20 bucks in their pockets to go into a mall and buy an album? Where are their parents? Where is the school system? Where is the society that is backing them up? I don't want to. There's an article in the LA Times, which is not the world's greatest newspaper. But there's an interesting article from last week about the Mapplethorpe exhibit and the Anthony Serrano's Piss Christ, which in case you don't know, and I can't imagine you don't know, because one of the interesting things about this is if you lead an obscenity campaign, it's one of those buzzwords where you get tons and tons of coverage, where people start to listen to you and you can propagate your ideas. And I do just agree with Jack that the media in this country controls and tells you. The media in this country has got an ongoing war, and you're going to get to listen to Richard Valeriani tomorrow talk about, there's a great article by Walter Cronkite. The government of this country and the military of this country has just controlled absolutely what happened in Iraq and in Kuwait. Locked people off, decided that it was not good for us to see what was actually happening in the war. And they had all sorts of little wonderful reasons and all sorts of great excuses for why they were preventing us from knowing. Peter Arnault, the man who was in Baghdad, was being attacked all over this country. For what? He was being attacked for sitting in the headquarters of the enemy in their major city and being bombed and risking his life to tell us what the hell was going on over there. Our own government wasn't doing that. Those are the things that if you chip those off and you chop them up and you put them in a box in a nice container and you paint it a Madison Avenue graphic color, it really looks good, but then one day you're going to wake up and you've got no freedom whatsoever. In this article, there is a parallel that is drawn, and I do not infer that Jack believes in this, in any way, case, or form. But there's an exhibit of art in Los Angeles which is showing the difference, or the similarity, between what the Nazis in 1937 in Germany called degenerate art, Chagall, Beckmann, Delaunay, Eisner, Munch, a lot of German artists, most of whom happened to be Jewish, inconveniently for them. But art of that period, before the Nazis took power, the Nazi Party was going around and starting to attack the art and the museums as being the purveyors of a degeneracy. They were telling people that looking at things like listening to a Luther Campbell album were bad for them and tearing apart the entire society. One of the points was that it was an insult to German womanhood. That you had a very self-conscious male society, National Socialism, making a sharp distinction between the depiction of women meant for private use or what was appropriate for the public. That sensuality and expressionism violated those public prohibitions which they in turn had created. It was a threat to the Nazi manhood. It was a threat to their attitude of moral respectability. How similar is that to what we see in this kind of situation? How similar is that to we are raping and tearing apart women? Therefore, you will not have the right any longer. We must go to courts and have it decided in small, separate situations on local mores what you can look at and what you can't look at. I live in New Mexico. I live in California. I was born in New York. I spend half of my life in airplanes between here and Europe. I travel all over the world constantly. I'm an exceedingly lucky human being. I find that the societies that I have been in, the ones behind the Iron Curtains and the ones out here, that the major difference is that the societies that have the greatest repression, the greatest horrors, the greatest atrocities, are the ones that have the greatest degree of censorship and the greatest control by one person who's decided that they will tell everybody else what they will think, what they will read, what they will see, and what they'll listen to.
Of course, the problem Mr. Morris has, as well as the problem the ACLU has, is that they don't like democracy. You see, the majority doesn't have any rights. A society doesn't have any rights. Only individuals have rights. And yet I share with you this poster that you get with every Band in the USA album, which, by the way, Two Live Crews, it was their follow-up album. It was a commercial disaster. Why? Because we dried up their under-18 market. Musicland wouldn't sell Two Live Crew anymore because the prosecution of Two Live Crew, which the ACLU, not Jack Thompson, gave a tremendous boost to nationally, alerted the American people that obscenity was being sold to children in record stores and in shopping malls and on Main Street America. But this poster recites the First Amendment, the last phrase of which the ACLU doesn't like. The people have a right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's exactly what has happened democratically in 49 states and in the federal government, in Congress, and the Supreme Court, which is not exactly a hotbed of conservatism, has said that obscenity laws democratically enacted are indeed constitutional. Why? Because obscenity is harmful. You can't, likewise, cry fire in this room because people have a right not to be trampled, and you have a right to limit, if you're a state or the federal government, the distribution of pro-rape material because women have a right not to be raped. It's a simple right. Any society must, in an ordered fashion, balance the right of artists or non-artists or whatever they call themselves against the right of women, for example, also under the Bill of Rights, to be secure in their persons and in their homes. A right, a tangible right that women no longer have in this country. Date rape is a reality in this country. Campus rape is a reality on this campus. You cannot walk a street in Miami, and of course obscenity is not the only reason, but you can't walk a street in Miami if you're a woman, some places, whether it's light or dark, because we are a society that does not take seriously the rape of women. Freedom is not the only value in this society. Freedom for what? If you look at the Constitution, you recognize that communities and the society has certain values. We hold, in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women, I would insert, are created equal, with rights and with values that are worth protecting. I was on the campus at Berea College, and a young black student came up to me and he said, "I don't want you messing with this album because it's got a great beat. I like to dance to the album." And I felt, in a sense, not because of any virtue on my part, but I thought of the exchange between Christ and the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler came up to Christ, if you remember, and he said, "How can I inherit the kingdom of heaven?" And Christ said, "You must keep the commandments." And the rich young ruler said, "I've done that." And Christ said, "Well, then give away your riches." And the rich young ruler walked away sad because he was unwilling to do this. You know what this young man said when I asked him, "Would you give up this album that you like to dance to if it meant that one woman might not be raped?" And he said, "No." We are the me generation. We want what we want regardless of whom it hurts. And what John didn't tell you is that at that Utah debate, after that girl stood up and said pornography had nothing to do with my rape, 3 women stood up 10 rows behind them and said, "We work in a rape treatment center. And every day we counsel women and children who have been raped." And they said in at least half of the cases, obscenity plays a central role in the rapes that have occurred. G.K. Chesterton responded to an essay contest that was promoted in what was a great newspaper and still is, the London Times, in the 1920s. And the essay question for the subscribers was, quote, "What is wrong with society?" Close quote. Chesterton responded with a 2-word essay, "I am." Ladies and gentlemen, we're all capable of rape. We're all capable of treating human beings as though they were not human beings. It is the purpose of government to point human beings towards what is good and what is virtuous. And certainly rape is not virtuous, and certainly the record industry is one industry that is among the most irresponsible in that regard in the country. And if you don't believe that, I have some Milli Vanilli records I'd like to sell you.
Suddenly I don't like democracy. My reaction to that, Jack, are the first two words ever said over a microphone at Woodstock when I suddenly looked out and what was supposed to be an empty field had 500,000 people in it. Holy shit. You can alert me all you want to, Jack, but you cannot and you will not judge me. For me. Pick for me, choose for me, and tell me. My turn to quote somebody who you're not going to agree with because he was a rotten old liberal named William O. Douglas, who said that the First Amendment was not fashioned as a vehicle for dispensing tranquilizers to the people. Its prime function was to keep debate open to offensive as well as to stay people. The tendency throughout history has been to subdue the individual and to exalt the power of government. That's it in a nutshell. If you've got to go to law, if you've got to make a law to cover, to prevent somebody from reading or seeing something, then you've got a very, very strange, very, very sad society. There need to be laws to protect women. The penalty for criminal rape should be massive. It should be major. Also, there should be in this country, and is not as fast as some of us would like, an educational system that starts to pick up and puts us back in a place in the world that we belong to be, not just because our technology can kill more people faster than anybody else's. David Halberstam has written a book that I heartily recommend to everybody, which has nothing whatsoever to do with obscenity, called The Last Century. It's about how we have become, as Jack says, a little too much me, a little too much taking care of ourselves, and how we've let our educational system slide, we've let our concern for our kids and the people around us slide. I do come from a generation and an era in the 60s where we did care what the person next to us was thinking and doing and saying, and we were willing to give them their chance to say it. Sometimes with the aids of drugs for hours and hours and hours to no advantage whatsoever, but we were there and we listened. And that's gone away from our society a bit. And you people, I can't say you guys, I hate the phrase, but you young men, young women, now I sound like somebody's grandfather. You out there, have the chance in going to the school as you're going to and doing what you're doing. You're going to what seems to me to be a very hip, very fast, very interesting school. And a lot of you are here not because you're full-time students, because you want to do something extra, learn something extra, and put something into your lives. That's the energy that prevents, that does not condone rape, does not condone the trashing of other people because of their color or their race or religion. That's what the country's about. That's what freedom's about. That's what the First Amendment's about. Thank you very much.
Is this mic on? Can you hear? Now we're going to have questions from the audience. Can you turn this mic on, please?
By the way, Douglas participated in the Roth decision, which held obscenity constitutionally.
If we could just wait for the questions. Okay. Anyone who wants to ask a question, would you please go to the microphone there, and we'll take them in the order that you go there, please. Also, we want to remind you on the format that each person, both of our guests will answer each question, please. If you'd state your name and your question, we'd appreciate it.
My name is Judy Wadley, and this is directed primarily to Mr. Thompson.
Yes.
And I have to say, Mr. Thompson, that some of the things you've said here today frighten me even more than the lyrics of Two Live Crew. Yesterday in this auditorium, we heard about accountability. Wouldn't a better way to handle what happened with Two Live Crew be accountability, to make the people accountable for the actions that resulted from their music than this, what I see as type of censorship that you're trying to do?
Well, if you commit a criminal act, it seems to me you ought to be held accountable. Luther Campbell has said his albums are obscene, and that he's not rapping about the ghetto, he's not rapping about social situations. He's rapping about sex and as dirty, he says, as we can make it. Now, what happened in Fort Myers Beach Elementary School, I think, is illustrative. Tony Sindler there, the principal, heard 8-year-old girls repeating the lyrics of the album. And why? Because one little girl was sold the album and brought it to school and played it for all the children. Now, certainly the parents of the other children weren't responsible. Their mistake was letting their children go to school. So those parents weren't irresponsible. What I would suggest is that there is a responsibility that falls upon the record industry, that falls upon record retailers, and upon Luther Campbell in the willful, knowing, criminal distribution of material to children. Why? Because it is in fact harmful. Some of those little girls, and some people will think this fanciful, you can call Tony Sindler and verify it, needed counseling, professional counseling, because they were frightened at the prospect of growing up to be women, having to engage in these sex acts which were described to them as normal. I think they were harmed by that. The counseling indicates that they were harmed by it. So I think there is harm that comes from distribution of this material, but I agree with you in the point that people who then act upon that and actually harm people are indeed criminally culpable if what the harm is an actual rape. But I would suggest that we have a chain of causation here, and I'm anxious and eager to prevent the chain of causation from ever getting started. I'd like to prevent rapists from being encouraged to rape.
That's so long an answer, I don't know where to start. I think, yes, there is an accountability. And I think the accountability is with whoever commits the crime. I think the accountability is with the parents. And I don't have to go on 45 minutes to say that.
Next question, please.
Yes, my name is Melanie Delaney. I'm from Spokane. I work with a group of parents who are actually trying to educate other parents as to what heavy metal and rap music is really about. This is not censorship, it's education. A lot of parents can't get a hold of this type of material, and we try to, to supply it to them. My concern would really, I'd like to address this to Mr. Morris, whether or not it's really the lack of corporate responsibility on the part of the record companies, on the impact that they have on young people today. As far as I'm concerned, it's really an exploitation of young people. This is a $16 billion industry. Are you going to try to tell me that all you're standing on is it a First Amendment right issue? As far as I'm concerned, this is a big business issue.
What is the damage of heavy rap and heavy metal?
As far as I'm concerned, it's an exploitation of children. I think children at young ages, I've been to rap. 24-year-olds, and I'm sorry, sir, that's exploitation of youth.
Well, exploitation for what way? In other words, exploitation in taking the money of young kids?
That's right. Let me read you something.
That's fair market practice. You can't. I mean, does that mean that Harry Belafonte is the only record that can be sold? To heavy metal or rap. I happen to have over 25 years in the music business, never presented either one of the acts purely simply because the music I don't fancy it. But where is it destroying our society? If there's somebody out there selling it, nobody makes you buy it. The fact that you're working with parents groups, you're doing what I wish Jack was doing.
That's right. Because
Jack should be working with parents groups and making your point. I don't think there's any validity to your point.
We have several Mr. Thompson. I'm sorry, we have to get to the next person. Mr. Thompson has to respond.
You come around again.
Let me just read this.
Go to the end of the line and come back and we'll still do it. I'll stand here all night if we have to.
This is from the liner notes of the album Welcome to the Pleasure Dome by a group called Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Let me tell you what they think.
They don't even exist anymore.
John, let her respond. Let her respond.
Is my microphone on? Can you hear me?
You can have Jack's.
I do not need these two gentlemen to moderate for me.
There are a whole bunch of liberals who don't want to hear the truth. Go ahead, man.
That's right.
Would you you please read that, Mr. Thompson respond, and then the next question.
This is
Thank you.
exactly coming straight out of the record companies. Manipulation of children's minds in the field of religion or politics would touch off a parental storm and harass congressional investigations. But in the world of commerce, children are fair game and legitimate prey. That's my point.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Billboard magazine, in their infinite lack of wisdom, asked me to write an editorial about what the record industry must do in order to deal with the problem in its own house. And I said, and I believe it even more now than 3 months ago, that the record industry will draw the line between what is harmful and what is not harmful to children, or the parents of America will draw and quarter the record industry. And if the record industry doesn't understand that, they need to talk to that lady who expresses the rage at a record industry who will sell Justify My Love, depicting lesbianism and sadomasochism and group sex, Madonna's video, to children as young as 8 years of age, with Madonna going on Nightline and saying, in all seriousness, because she's a true believer in this, on MTV we need to have an S&M hour. We need to have a gang rape hour.
She did not
and so
say
forth.
that. I watched the show too,
She
Jack.
said all of that, and we need a sexual violence hour. Why? Because Madonna believes that we need to expose children. We need to expose children to all forms of sex as early as possible. And that's from the woman whose West Coast company where you live is called Slutco.
Jack, that's
the name of her company.
This is really a challenge.
I think all of this goes, excuse me for 1 second, I think all of this goes into the category that...
Wait a minute, do we get rejoinders to my response,
no,
which is a rejoinder to you?
Okay, forget
the next question, please.
Thank you.
Make up your own mind.
My name is Diana Nolan, and I'm a parent of an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old girl, and I'm from Spokane, Washington. And my question is about the two different rights that I feel like you gentlemen are talking about. The right to artistic free speech and the right of parents to protect children. And I do not see them as mutually exclusive. I see that they could both happen in the United States of America. And I feel as a parent, which you are calling upon us to do to protect our kids, I feel like we are at a point in time that we need some help. And I feel like that's what parents are asking, that you give some help on album labels, that you print lyrics, that you do some rating, so that we can protect our 8, 10, 13-year-olds. Because I've gone into the record companies, there is no way to tell. There are no lyrics printed on a lot of these hardcore porn albums.
Hardcore porn, I'd have to stop you on that point. There is no such thing as a hardcore porn album.
Don't divert what I'm asking you. I don't see, again, my question, I don't see free artistic speech and parental rights as mutually exclusive.
Neither do I, for a moment. I happen
Okay,
to be a
then
parent
what-
also. And I also...
Just finish asking my question.
Okay, let's...
What do you have against helping parents out by rating albums?
Thank you very much.
I think actually by rating them, I think you change the whole question around at the end by saying a rating system. I think a rating system is a waste of time because it's an avoidance. It is more of a mechanism. I also, by the way, am a parent. I have a 16 and 18-year-old boy, both of whom have managed to get themselves in more than their ration of deep trouble for lots of reasons, but it ain't music. It has to do with parental neglect, which I'll stand here and say I'm guilty for. If you want to go to the record store and check the albums that your children are going to buy, more power to you. I think you're taking on the responsibility and doing it. And whatever your interpretation of what they should see and what they should listen to or not, they have to live with that condition because they're your kids, and you have to live with the condition because you make the choice. Absolutely. It is your choice to do it. To ask the record company or the federal government to tell you, to be the judgment of whether this should go out or not, I think is a total waste of time. I applaud what you're doing. I might not agree with the reasons you're doing it or anything else, but I think you're doing what I'm saying has to be done.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes, the lady is absolutely right. There's no reason why we cannot have artistic freedom in this country and also protect children and also protect women from material that advocates their rape. If you recall, the definition of obscenity under Miller versus California is that the item, if it's obscene, is without any artistic content. And Luther Campbell himself admits that. He says, my stuff is obscene. There's nothing in here that is of any social significance about anything whatsoever. So what is the harm in getting rid of it? There's no harm except to the bottom line of Luther Campbell. That's the point. A society has to draw the line.
Next question, please.
Okay, my name is Andrea, and this is to you, Jack.
Yes.
When you first started out, you said that Luther was from your hometown, which is in Miami, and you related it to Miami Vice. Now, what I don't understand is from watching Miami Vice, they promoted sex and they promoted violence. And so you can't sit there and say that Miami is so clean. If, this record comes out...
I'd be the first one not to say that.
Okay, well, when this record comes out, it's a person's choice to listen to it. You cannot blame somebody for what they do because of a record. It's from what happened to them in the past, or it's from what, what's going on in their mind. You just can't blame it on the record. And I don't know how you can sit up there and get everybody's pity by saying all these people have jumped up and, have been raped. You're going by pity, is what you want from everybody else's pity, and you're totally not relating it to the subject.
Okay, I heard about 5 questions there. I'm all in favor of people getting emotional about this issue. The women whom I've represented who have been raped are very emotional about it, and they asked me to be here today. And 20% of what I receive here as a lecture fee goes to aid sexually abused men, women, and children. So I feel very deeply about this, and I wish more people in this country felt deeply about it. I want you to pity them. I want you to pity Luther Campbell, who has such a twisted view of sex that he thinks, and this is a reality for a number of women in this country, that they cannot have an orgasm unless they're beaten as a part of the sex act. Now, this lady doesn't know. This lady needs to talk to the people who counsel sexual abuse victims who, as children, ma'am, if you think it's funny, were beaten in molestation situations. They associate beating with having an orgasm, and they can't have an orgasm unless they're beaten. That's the gospel of Two Live Crew. Beat women. They enjoy it, and they deserve it, and they'll thank you for it after they do it. Fact is, John, don't judge. Just one final point.
Let me explain the rules. After you ask a question, we can't get into debate because other people are behind you. Mr. Thompson,
Just one final point. At Doane College in Nebraska, where John and I debated, a young lady, a co-ed there, came up and she said, I was raped as an 8-year-old because of the teenage boy that was babysitting me in her father's church. He was a pastor, put in front of her a hardcore pornography magazine and said, this must be okay, it's in the magazine, this is what I want you to do. And the abuse went on for a year, and she's scarred and harmed by that. This society legitimizes, to the extent that they allow it, the sale of Two Live Crew's album, which advocates the same thing.
Okay. Mr. Morris.
I have a greater respect for people than Jack seems to, because he seems to think that it has to be controlled and taken out of the hands. It's not even worth I pass.
Good, I'll take his time.
No, the next question.
No, you won't. No.
Thank all of you for cooperating. This is really interesting.
Okay, my name's Jeff Green, and this question is for Mr. Thompson. And I happen to love the Two Live Crew's music, and I do feel that
You love their music?
Let him ask the question.
I didn't
please.
hear him.
I like their music a lot.
Okay, you said you
Okay,
loved it.
and I agree that children should not be allowed to listen to it. I think they should be prohibited from it. And I think you should target the retailers and make them ID the purchasers of these albums, instead of targeting, Luther Campbell and the Two Live Crew. And if you're protecting women, then how come thousands upon thousands of them attend their concerts and buy their albums if they're so affected by this?
Well, the second part first, because a lot of women buy the lie. That they aren't equals of men. And that men have a proprietary right upon them. Sir, I gotta tell you, with all due respect, if you don't understand that a lot of women who have been in a sexual abuse situation think that it's their fault or that they deserve it and so forth, you don't know anything about sexual abuse. And I say that with all respect. You'll maybe one day understand that. But Luther Campbell is the most criminally culpable of anybody Because he's the guy who put it into the stream of commerce. He's the guy, Mr. Green, who says that the stuff is so harmful to children that he won't allow his own daughter to listen to it, but will sell it to other people's children. So I'm not for putting store owners in jail as much as I am for putting Luther Campbell in jail. He's a first-class racketeer, pornographer, distributor of obscenity to children in violation of criminal obscenity statutes. If he's not culpable, nobody is.
Mr. Morris.
Yet your entire campaign, sum total, has put one poor, not very bright black man in Miami in jail.
Well,
Or a threat of being in
Let him
jail.
respond, please.
Luther Campbell's not in jail. The album is not illegal. It's still being pressed. It's still out there. I happen to think it's crap. If you want to like it, you can like it. I mean, that's my whole point. But the only guy who's taken a fall on this thing is a guy named Charles Freeman, who ain't very bright, who went to Miami to open a business because he was running with gangs in Chicago. And he's the only one that has actually been given a penalty, which is the sum result of this whole campaign. And as much as Jack and I get along personally in certain ways, I don't think Jack is going around the country preventing women from being raped by wanting to physically or verbally smash these albums over his name.
Next question, please.
It's a shame I can't respond.
My name is Jason Alquist, and I listen to rap and I like it, but I also
So
don't
do I.
like Two Life Crew. But I'm going to play devil's advocate here to bring up an issue that I haven't heard in this debate yet. Let me clarify. You say that, this is for Mr. Thompson, you say that as nasty as they want to be, encourages rape and violence.
Hmm.
Correct? Okay. On that line of thinking, would you also say a modest proposal by Jonathan Swift encourages cannibalism of children?
No. Because you're familiar with it, right? You know that he wasn't serious, right? You know that he wrote it to make a completely different point, whereas Luther Campbell is selling to children the idea that it is okay. In fact, Luther Campbell lives out his obscenity. He has illegitimate children whom he has abandoned. He has had people, a woman who happens to be the cousin of Professor Griff, a DJ on the radio in Miami whom he had beaten up by his bodyguard who used to play for the Miami Hurricanes, world's ugliest football team, from my hometown, ugly as far as antics. Luther Campbell lives out what he acts on. Jonathan Swift didn't eat children, as far as I know. So there is life imitating obscenity.
Okay, thank you. I was uneducated in that.
Mr. Morris, let Mr. Morris respond.
Nor can Mr. Thompson prove that Luther Campbell has raped anyone. Nor can he prove that he's advocating. I mean, the whole point is his album is facetious in the same way as Swift's paper. And you don't, because it doesn't suit your purposes, want to agree with him.
Agree with one. Next question, please.
That it's facetious, that it's a joke, and you don't get it.
It's not a joke.
Okay. Next question, please.
Timothy Duffield. Earlier, before you were praising a lesbian for her status, then you slam Madonna because she said something about a lesbian. I think that's very contradictory, but I'll let that go before I start.
No, I was praising...
No, that's all right. Can I
Well,
finish?
no. It's not all right. It's not all right, sir. I wasn't praising her status as a lesbian. I was saying God bless her for what she said to the commission, okay?
It may be one of the few things about Andrea Dworkin that one could praise, because she, in fact, wrote legislation preventing the breaking of women's bodies from her attitude, submitted it to 9 legislatures, 8 threw it out in 30 seconds, and one of them actually bothered to pass it, and the Supreme Court was waiting outside the door to kill that one.
I do believe you're trying to get 2 questions in.
Yeah.
which is-
No,
That
wasn't
isn't...
a question.
I'm going to... If you say I said something I didn't say, I'm going to correct you. What's your question?
Okay. My question, isn't it possible this music is an outcry of help from today's young black society who are positively venting their anger, of which they see every day, instead of maybe selling drugs, go gang fights, killing people heinously? Isn't this a better solution to what they're doing?
Yeah.
Be careful on the way out of touching his shoulder.
What was that? Luther Campbell has not left the gang warfare behind him. You know, he's a walking crime wave. He's had his club closed down because he's continued to have children in there serving alcohol to them and having women take their clothes off and shooting people in the back, sir, with shotguns and so forth. That's all of the stuff that Luther Campbell has had his bodyguards do. So he hasn't turned over a new leaf, so to speak, nor has he turned over a fig leaf. I would share the words of Edward Arundel, who said the controversy surrounding Two Live Crew is not a racial issue. The crew is not a victim of America's racial double standard. These guys are not poor, black, misunderstood youths. They happen to be thugs who distribute obscenity to black children, to white children, that advocate that black women and white women ought to be raped. That's why Coleman Young, the mayor of Detroit, wouldn't let their concerts occur in Detroit. Two Live Crew couldn't care less about their own people that work for them. Luther Campbell has an incredible turnover in his company because he won't pay his black employees. He keeps everything for himself. So please, Luther Campbell is not the philanthropist, social worker that you think he is.
I think Jack's fixation on Luther Campbell is beginning to concern me, purely and simply because I think most of the people in this room, certainly I feel, that Luther Campbell is an unimportant mood passing through and will disappear and go away. There is a problem of rape, there is a problem of materials that are available to kids in this country, and that is what needs to be attacked, not this poor or rich, good or bad, we know he's black, that's established, black man from Miami. He's had his time, his history, he's gone. Let's look at the problem and the condition, let's do something about that. Let's just not rant and rail about one black guy, because it does get to the point where you start to think one doth protest too much about the racial issue of it. This guy's history. Let's go on to the rest of it.
Let me say one thing. We're going to, unfortunately, have one more question. They have their minute summary. Then we'll move over to the monitor room and you can continue over there because we have a panel waiting for us. This will be the last question. Sorry to everyone else.
Okay, my name is Darrell Elmore, and I happen to be a music major and want to spend my whole career in the music industry. And I was wondering, if you get rid of Two Live Crew, will rape be gone? Or will it not increase?
I think you're talking over their misguided applause. What was the last
part? Proof that Two Live Crew has a direct increase?
And they're now over their groans. What is the proof?
What is your proof that Two Live Crew has a direct increase on rape?
Well, I believe that we live, and we all know this, in a rather diverse society. My point is that that rape is caused by a multiplicity of factors, all of them going together to form the event of the rape. Ted Bundy, if you saw the interview the night before he was electrocuted, appropriately, he did not excuse himself from any criminal culpability for what he did, but he said that the hardcore pornography that he consumed was like a training manual on how to abuse, and it incited him to commit certain rapes that he might not have otherwise committed. And Mr. Morris calls this the Meese Commission. Ed Meese didn't write it. He didn't choose the people that were on it. It was liberals and conservatives, and they concluded, quote, since we believe that an increase in aggressive behavior towards women will in a population increase the incidence of sexual violence in that population, we have reached the conclusion unanimously and confidently that the available evidence strongly supports the hypothesis that substantial exposure to sexually violent materials bears a causal relationship to antisocial acts of sexual violence. I believe ideas have consequences, that people act on those ideas, and I don't think the government ought to tell anybody not to buy it or to buy it. I think that juries made up of people that sit in this room have a right to decide what is sold to children and what is sold to crazed adults who consume this stuff and who might act on it.
Mr. Moore.
God help you if you want to spend your life in the music business. I mean, that's just... Jack's quote from the Miller report, or from the Meese report, which they do back off of later on, does draw a direct line to the exposure of sexually violent material. And I agree that there is, or it is my opinion, for what little that may be worth, that sexually violent material is bad and in the hands of people with sick minds is liable to cause trouble, and therefore it should be prevented from existing. But the problem is when the line gets drawn from sexually violent material, snuff films and, written things that have the combination of violence with sex, is what generally causes, in the sociological reports, most of which are discredited out of the Meese report, be it Meese or not. Most of those things, the emphasis is very, very much on the violence. If you look at television or look at films, I think all of us agree, although why don't we do something about it, that the violent content of television, movies, everything else is way, way too high to be a steady diet for our children. We all rail against it, but we don't try to do something about it. We don't stay away by choice from the films that use that violence to make money.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we will have a 1-minute summary, and in that format, Mr. Morris will go first.
If I haven't summarized 53 times, I don't know what. I think it's a matter of choice. If I see maybe 300 people in this room, 400 people in this room, I don't think that I have the right to tell any one of them, no matter how much I agree with them or disagree with them, what they will read, what they will listen to, what they will see. I may disagree, as I did with the lady about heavy metal. I don't like it. But my feeling is that if you start to chip it away, if you get angry about something and you don't like something and you take it away, and if you hang sex around it, it's much easier to slash at it. Then what you do is you begin the general degradation of the entire system, and you can't do it. So you've got to put up with some stuff that you don't like to be able to hold the whole together.
Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Malcolm Muggeridge, who died this past year, noted that with the advent of the 20th century, we have passed from the Christian era into the post-Christian era. Why? Because culture no longer exists. What passes as culture is a frontal assault upon God and everything He would have for us. We have gone from the sale in this country of obscenity to adults in the back rooms of out-of-the-way bookstores to the sale of obscenity to children in the shopping malls of America. If you chip away at the family, if you chip away at the innocence of an 8-year-old child, pretty soon you have nothing upon which to build a society or a culture. Mr. Morris brought up Mapplethorpe and Serrano. Government funds, our government, spending money on the exhibition of a man sticking a bullwhip up his rectum, urinating into another man's mouth, showing the genitals of a 3-year-old girl, and the piss price by Serrano. Government funds being spent, your money, to show the creator of the universe in a jar of urine. If you think we're on a slippery slope, it seems to me we might be already at the bottom of it. Thank you.
We are going to adjourn to the bar room for a very lively panel. Thank you for coming, and let's thank our guests.